My Lord's fourth oral question, Lord Coker.
I beg to move the question on the order paper standing in my name.
My Lords, we are deeply concerned by Russia's pattern of military build-ups in and around Ukraine and are closely monitoring the situation. My right honourable friend, the Foreign Secretary, has held discussions with her Russian and Ukrainian counterparts, restating the UK's strong support to Ukraine and urging the Russian government to de-escalate the situation. We are looking at a package of sanctions to raise the cost of any further aggressive Russian actions against Ukraine, and we already support Ukrainian military development and regularly conduct joint exercises.
My Lords, we are edging ever closer to a real crisis in the Ukraine. US Defence Intelligence speaks of 175,000 potential Russian troops on the border. Emergency talks between President Biden and President Putin. The President of the Ukraine asking for British soldiers. The noble Lord the Minister will know this is a very real crisis, and one morning we're going to wake up to, as the Defence Intelligence in the US says, a Soviet invasion of the Ukraine. What is our response going to be if anything like that is happening? What are we doing to talk to the Russians to secure their assurances from them about this particular situation? What are we doing about talking to our European neighbours about this particular situation? And let's get it sorted before we have a very real crisis on our hands.
My Lords, I know the noble Lord speaks for deep insight as a former Shadow Secretary of State for Defence. Let me assure the noble Lord we're working very closely with our European allies and indeed the United States. As the noble Lord accurately said, we recently, President Biden, President Putin, have had discussions, but equally on the 6th and 7th of December, so over the last couple of days, there were meetings also with our Prime Minister and other leaders, including our European allies, where our Prime Minister updated others on his conversation with President Putin, and equally, my right honourable friend, the Foreign Secretary at the OSCE recently, amongst others, met with the Ukrainian Foreign Minister and also the Russian Foreign Minister, and reiterated the points that I've made. And today, as the noble Lord may know, we are actually engaging in a strategic dialogue with Ukraine in London.
My Lord, the United Kingdom has been a key contributor to the enhanced forward presence in Estonia and Poland, underlining NATO's Article 5 that an attack on one is an attack on all. Of course, Ukraine is only an aspirant member of NATO, so Article 5 does not apply. But have there been any discussions within NATO about potentially delivering a parallel programme to send a very clear message to the Russians that we support our Ukrainian allies?
Again, I can assure my noble friend he is, of course, right to raise the issue of NATO. We, of course, remain very strong supporters based on the 2008 Bucharest Summit declaration of Ukraine's membership of NATO. I assure my noble friend we are talking to NATO allies on this very point, and indeed it was a subject of conversation of my right honourable friend, the Foreign Secretary, in a recent meeting with NATO.
My Lords, when Russia annexed Crimea, there were reports that we would have been better able to anticipate and track events if there had been more Russian speakers in the Foreign Office. Are we better equipped now to monitor what might be happening between Russia and Ukraine?
My Lords, I know Russian is one of the language which is also forms part of our diplomatic academy, and of course those deployed to Russia do receive language training. There are a raft of, I think there's over 40 plus languages that our diplomats speak, and Russian is one of them.
My Lords, when the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan in 1979, the European response was delayed because it happened at Christmas. When the Americans left Afghanistan, the British response was marred by the fact that the Foreign Secretary and the Permanent Secretary were both on holiday. Could the Minister tell the House whether the Foreign and Commonwealth and Development Office is now looking again at leave policy to make sure that at crucial times somebody is always in the office?
My Lords, I think in any crisis lessons are learned, and the noble lady is right. I think the challenges of the situation we saw in Afghanistan are all too apparent. What we did achieve, I think we look at those achievements with great degree of humility, and we must show humanity in our response to Afghanistan on the issue of Christmas and, of course, the situation not just in Ukraine but other parts of the world. I think we are very much prepared and focused on that, as is my right honourable friend, the Foreign Secretary.
My Lord.
I feel a little bit reassured by the answer by the Noble Lord the Minister, but I have to say the last response when we debated this in the House from the government front bench, where they said it would be unfortunate if there were a thermonuclear war, didn't actually really reassure me. I want to raise another issue, and that is actually Ukraine itself. There is very real concern that there are some in Ukraine who would like to stoke this for something to happen, and part of that is because we have pushed for them to become a member of NATO, which I think is a mistake, because I think that is something that has caused a problem within Russia. Can I ask the Noble Lord the Minister, are we in a very firm dialogue with Ukraine to make sure they keep a clamp on what's happening there, and are we not trying to give them promises of things like NATO, which do nothing but encourage this situation to get worse?
Yeah. My Lords, the answer to the Noble Lord's second question is yes, we are very closely engaged with Ukraine, as we are today, on the issue of their NATO membership and indeed our support. The support we've given militarily is very much defensive and based on technical support as well.
My Lords, there have been a lot of difficulties in the Ukraine, partly the non-implementation of the agreement made in Minsk and the need for talks about the future of the eastern Ukraine and a follow-up of the initiative of the Finnish president to actually de-escalate the situation and have a peace conference in Europe to look at the outstanding issues which have arisen following the dissolution of the Soviet Union. Should we not put our efforts behind those of the Finnish president to get a discussion going?
My Lords, we are supportive of all peaceful efforts, but in particular focused on the Minsk agreements, which Russia has also signed, and we ask them to uphold that agreement.
My Lords, one of the things that the Noble Lord mentioned is working with our allies, and particularly sanctions, he knows, are ineffective without support from allies. President Biden's talks with President Putin did result in certain conditions being laid down. The US State Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan, did report out some of the countermeasures. I think what everyone in this House wants to know is, will this government be prepared to work with our allies and implement such measures in time, unlike its failure to fully implement the Russia report?
My Lords, on the Noble Lord's second point, I have written to him. If there are further questions, haven't you? Well, I will follow it up. I've got a copy of the letter. I can give that to the Noble Lord afterwards. On his earlier point, the short answer is yes. When we've worked on sanctions, we've worked with our EU allies as well as others.
Could I say this is not an isolated crisis. This is part of a long-term campaign by a gangster regime, which includes international assassinations and the subversion of legitimate governments and interference in democratic processes. It's been going on for years and will go on for years. Does the Minister not agree, Noble Lord the Minister not agree, that what is required is not just a set of responses to this particular incident, but a long-term diplomatic effort to gain cooperation and determination across Russia's opposition? And should we not be reducing a little bit the heat of the arguments we have with some of our neighbours in favour of greater cooperation? Stop squabbling over fish when the sharks are circling.
My Lords, there's little I can disagree with the noble and gallant Lord, who speaks with great insight, and I assure him, I agree with him totally. We need to take the temperature down. We've seen the situation with the likes of Mr. Navalny, and where we've been most effective is when we've acted and acted together.
Is my noble friend aware that when... my noble friend aware that when the Soviet Union collapsed, some of the territories, there wasn't necessarily great attention paid to it. But in Russia, the loss of the Ukraine was much the most sensitive. And the point paid by the noble Lord West, I entirely agree with. That in this difficult situation in which Russia has now seen the steady advance of NATO right up to its very borders, sensitivity in this situation, not to allow any action against Ukraine, but to recognise a genuine Russian concern that needs to be properly addressed.
I agree with my noble friend, and that is exactly why my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, and my right honourable friend, the Foreign Secretary, have engaged quite directly, both with President Putin and Foreign Minister Lavrov. And again, we continue to engage with Russia in other channels, including at the OSCE and at the UN Security Council.